The case was in car 7, strapped to the lower rack between a crate of water reclamation parts and a sealed drum of agricultural compound. I almost walked past it. The label said biological waste, inert/transit to disposal, and that is exactly the kind of case that does not require my attention on a resettlement run. My job on the Calder Shelf crossing is transit health, checking the living passengers in cars 1 through 4, logging anything that needs logging, certifying the manifest against any biological material that could affect the passenger deck. A cold case stenciled inert belongs to the freight officer. But I have been doing this for 22 years. And I have learned to notice things that are slightly wrong. The seal was wrong, not the industrial adhesive of a disposal transit, but a softer bead, pressed by hand with a medical-grade compound, the kind used to maintain internal temperature without vacuum sealing the contents. Disposal cases are cold all the way through. This one was not. My palm, rested for a half-second on the casing, told me that. I checked the corridor. The freight officer was 3 cars forward. The passenger deck was quiet. It was the 4th hour of a 9-hour crossing, and most of the resettlement families in cars 1 through 3 were asleep. I popped the case. She was curled on her side on a medical liner, knees drawn up, both hands tucked under her chin. Small, very small. Pale gray skin, with a faint luminescence gone dull with the cold, pointed ears laid flat, eyes closed. Orev. I knew the species from corridor medicine training, 6 years back. Oversized eyes, silver-lashed, currently shut. Breathing. Shallow. Slow, but breathing. I stood there for perhaps 4 seconds, then I reached in and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat, below the ear, where the Orev pulse runs near the surface. It was there, steady as a river current. 60 beats per minute maybe, nothing like distress. The Orev dormancy pulse, which I had read about but never felt. Someone had put her in this case deliberately. Someone who knew Orev biology well enough to calibrate the liner temperature to dormancy range. Someone who understood the corridor disposal protocol well enough to know that inert/transit to disposal cases do not get opened at checkpoints. Someone who had bet everything on a frontier medic following his instincts. I closed the case. I walked back to the medical kit bolted to the wall of car 5. I sat down at the fold-out desk, pulled my transit health tablet from its clip, and began writing. A transit health discovery report is not a complicated document. It requires a physical description of the subject, the date and time, the car number, the discovering officer's credentials, the subject's vital signs, and a clinical assessment of condition. It requires the discovering officer to certify that the subject is a living biological entity under their professional care, and therefore subject to Corridor Transit Health Code, Chapter 7, Section 4. No living biological entity discovered in transit may be transferred, removed, confiscated, or subjected to any legal writ until the transit reaches its scheduled terminal stop and the case is reviewed by a licensed resettlement medical authority. I filled in every field carefully. I transmitted it to the Corridor Health Network at the next relay beacon, Shelf Station 12, which came up 40 minutes into the crossing. I received my transmission confirmation at hour 4.5. At hour 5, the 2 men came to find me in car 5. I had seen them board at Calder Junction. They were not resettlement families. They wore the gray travel coats of Varath Compact Administrative Personnel, a category of traveler I have learned to watch on the shelf crossing. They had spent the first 4 hours in the rear of car 4, reviewing something on a shared tablet. Now they were standing in the entrance to car 5, and the taller one was holding a printed transit writ. He told me they were agents of the Calder Reclamation Bureau, operating under compact charter on behalf of a dissolved noble house. He told me they had a registered writ for recovery of biological assets belonging to that house, including 1 Orev juvenile, classified as unclaimed property of the dissolved house's estate, currently in transit on this train under a disposal manifest. He read the writ number. He told me to take them to car 7. I looked at the writ. It was properly filed. The date was 2 days old. The compact seal was correct. I told them I could not do that. The shorter one asked why. I showed them the transmission confirmation on my tablet. I told them that a transit health discovery had been filed at Shelf Station 12 40 minutes ago, certifying a living OREV juvenile in Car 7 as a patient under my professional care and the jurisdiction of Corridor Transit Health Code Chapter 7. I told them that Chapter 7, Section 4 was unambiguous. No legal instrument, including a recovery writ, may be executed against a living biological entity discovered in transit until the transit reaches its terminal stop and the case is reviewed by a licensed resettlement medical authority. The tall one told me the disposal manifest superseded a transit health filing. I told him the disposal manifest described the subject as inert. The subject was not inert. The subject had a pulse of approximately 60 beats per minute and was breathing without assistance. A manifest that misrepresents the condition of a biological subject is an invalid manifest under Corridor Code, and an invalid manifest cannot supersede anything. He told me I was obstructing a legal reclamation action. I told him I was practicing medicine on a patient in my care, which is what my license authorizes me to do, and that any interference with that practice on a transit vehicle constitutes a violation of Corridor Health Code Chapter 11, which carries a minimum suspension of compact travel credentials for 90 days. He looked at me for a long moment. He was a large man, and he was not accustomed to being told no by a middle-aged transit medic with reading glasses clipped to the breast pocket of his uniform. I looked back at him. I had nothing to be afraid of. I had filed my report. Everything I had done was written down, time-stamped, and transmitted to a network he could not reach from inside this train. He told me this was not finished. I told him we would reach the shelf terminal in 3 hours and 40 minutes, and a licensed resettlement medical authority would be notified to meet the train. He was welcome to present his writ at that point. That was the correct procedure. They went back to Car 4. I went back to Car 7. I opened the case. She was awake. She was sitting up on the medical liner, knees still folded, watching the door. Her eyes were open now, large, silver gray, with a steadiness in them that I was not prepared for. Not fear, not confusion, something older than either. She looked at me the way a child looks at a person they have already decided to trust, which is a look that takes some people years to earn, and which she gave me in an instant. And I did not deserve it yet, but I took it as the most serious obligation I had been handed in 22 years of doing this work. I sat down on the floor of Car 7, cross-legged, which put me at roughly her eye level. I said, in the 7 OREV syllables I knew from my corridor training, something approximating, "You are safe, we are going to the end of the line." She watched me for a moment. Then she reached into a fold of the medical liner and produced a small object and held it out to me on her open palm. It was a transit disc, a hand-stamped OREV resettlement marker, the kind families registered with the corridor authority before a crossing. The stamp code on it corresponded to a receiving contact at the shelf terminal. I recognized the format, because I had seen dozens of them filed at Calder Junction over the years. Someone had planned this down to the disc. I took out my tablet and scanned the code. I sent a message to the receiving contact's registered address. Patient in care. Arriving on schedule. Meet at medical bay, terminal platform. I received a reply in 11 minutes. One word, confirmed. The Reclamation Bureau agents were waiting at the platform when we arrived. There were also 2 Corridor Transit Authority officers who had been notified by the health network and who were considerably larger than the Bureau agents and considerably less interested in anyone's compact writ. The OREV resettlement liaison, a small, angular woman named Oressa Vell, who moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, was at the medical bay door before I had finished my disembarkation checklist. I walked the child out to her. Oressa Vell crouched down, said something in OREV that I did not catch, and the child answered in a voice I was hearing for the first time. Low, careful, 3 syllables. And then the child turned back to me. She pressed the transit disc into my palm and closed my fingers around it. Oressa Vell looked at me over the child's head and said, "In standard, she says that is for the one who read the manifest correctly." I held the disc and watched them walk through the terminal gate, and I thought about the person who had packed a liner to dormancy temperature, sealed a case by hand, and written inert on the outside, and trusted that somewhere on a 9-hour crossing of the Calder Shelf, one person would notice that the seal was wrong. They had not been wrong about that.